Welcome to the Gray Matters podcast, where we confront issues facing coaches and leaders in all areas. We live between the binary, and nothing is black or white. It's all shades of gray.
We're your hosts, Glenn Revel and Tim Kettenring. We look forward to sharing these conversations with you.
All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Gray Matters with Tim and Glenn. Back again for another episode. Episode 1234, I believe, is what we're on. So, Tim coming to you from Maverick Human Performance HQ. It looks like fresh off of Squattober. Just kidding. He doesn't Squattober. He just
Totally. I squatted one time this October, and I'm
one
really
squat.
really proud of it. It's actually
One,
the first time I've celebrated Squattober, so
and it was a front squat, not even to depth, is what I was
it
told.
it was actually a goblet squat on a squat wedge. Yep.
But that is actually not what we're talking about at all today. But I just wanted to bring that up. So we are talking about mental health. This is the mental health episode. So basically, this is only us sharing our experiences and exploring what worked or didn't work for us in managing our own mental health challenges. We are not mental health professionals, and we are not providing medical advice in any way. We highly recommend that you seek the support of a mental health professional if you're struggling with your mental health. But with that being said, one of the main facets in dealing with mental health issues, living with them is the main thing that I kind of took from it and that I've always lived off of is like you do not have to do it by yourself. And you shouldn't do it by yourself because you can't do it by yourself, right? You should have a support space around you, just like athletes have a team of support staff around them, right? And everybody leans on each other to accomplish things. It's very much the same way in your life. And that's probably something we'll get into talking about is like who are the people that are in your corner and on your team as like mental health stuff comes up. And we're not even, and we'll talk about like some quote unquote, this might not be the right word, disorders, right? And like things that have been diagnosed, but really, right? Like mental health can even just be like how you feel on a day to day basis and what your emotions are telling you and how you're processing things. And it's been a little bit stigmatized and now it's getting unstigmatized, but it's kind of also almost getting diluted, right? Like now therapy terms are very popular to use and they don't mean what they used to, or people are misusing them. I saw a meme the other day that says, uh-oh, the worst person you know just learned therapy words. So now they can gaslight you with their TikTok.
Yeah, the weaponization of therapy terms.
Yes. So that is generally what we're speaking about. And it's common, right? There's clinically diagnosed with anxiety. And I think there's like 1 in 3 people technically probably have anxiety. Mine actually originated from when I retired, when I got done playing
Mm.
sports. And this happens a lot as I kind of went through my initial counseling and diagnosis and all these things. And I was talking with the therapist. He asked me what my background was, and I told him, and he was like, basically, for your entire life, every 5 to 7 days, you got this huge adrenaline rush and this massive
Mm.
dopamine hit. And your body kind of got used to relying on that because it was so cyclical from the time I was a little kid till I was 26. And that looked like that was game day for me, right? And then when game day in my life went away, I didn't know, like I didn't get that feeling anymore. I didn't get it as strong as I used to. And mentally and probably like spiritually too, I was searching for something that would give me that, right? And my therapist, this was when I was in grad school at Angelo State, and it was the therapist that was on campus, and he basically was like, this happens a ton with athletes, with people in the military. Tim's 2 for 2, so congratulations. You just need like one more qualifying factor, and then you're the trifecta. And he was basically like a lot of times people turn to like they become addicts because they find something, right? Some
Yep.
kind of substance, some kind of activity that mimics or gives them that same feeling and they just keep chasing it. And when he pointed that out to me, it's kind of like someone just said something that made a lot of sense that I'd never thought of before, and this light came on. And the other thing I remember really specifically, which I thought was kind of funny, because I just thought, I don't know, like I just thought people did it because I did it. But he asked me, and it was so weird because he'd never met me before, but he nailed like this. He nailed it. He asked me, when you walk on the sidewalk, you know how there's cracks in the sidewalk? He was like, do you count the steps you take between the cracks on the sidewalk? And I do. And I was like, how do you know that about me? We've never even met before. And then,
That's
and that,
wild.
yes. And that's when I realized like how obsessed I was with performance and my relationship with it. wasn't quote unquote normal, or it wasn't something, whatever normal means, right? Like it was just,
Right.
I had a different relationship with it than other people did. But when he
Hmm.
said the sidewalk step counting, and I don't know if you do that, Tim, or if anyone that's listening has like a little thing that they do like that, I was like, oh, wow. It was reassuring because I was like, this guy demonstrated some expertise and knows what he's talking about. And it was also
Right.
reassuring because I was like, people have gone down this road before me. You know what I mean? And there's data and studies, and I'm going to be okay. So, anyways,
Yeah.
that is kind of what my, like, I don't know if we want to call it like our, actually, now that, dude, I'm having like a lot of, that was like a sleeper
No,
agent that woke
that
up
was
in
like
my
that was a
mind.
perfect lead in though, like because the thing that you talked about how that you had kind of a light bulb moment with your therapist, and like that's an insight. You gain an understanding of how your brain works, why you feel the way you do at certain times, why you behave the way you do. I mean, like that's the whole. That's what psychology is like the study of the brain and how you behave because of the way your brain structure is structured and how it functions. And like there's absolutely no way that like me as a person, I can't figure out on my own how my brain works and like why I do the things I do, right? And especially like within the context of like diagnosed, mental disorders, you can't rely on even like the people around you to provide you with the kind of feedback that you need to give you that mirror in order for you to figure out like how your brain works and how you behave or why you behave the way you do, right? And that's where like having a mental health professional and utilizing those kinds of resources. I mean, a lot of times, like you can read. I mean, there's a ton of shitty self-help books, but like, there's also some really, really good ones that can even just helping you, even just they can help you just understand like the brain itself, and then like how different things like drive behavior, and then you can kind of take those general lessons and say, okay, well, I noticed this pattern of behavior in myself. Maybe it's based on whatever that I don't, maybe I have an imbalance in neurotransmitters or whatever. And then when you add that extra layer of have a therapist, like it just helps you almost like magnify those insights that you learn from books, articles, etc. But all of it is to try to improve your life for one, but also like improve your relationships, improve how you do your job, improve how you lead, all these things. So, like one thing that I've always advocated, I mean, that's I've always advocated strongly for therapy for everybody, regardless of like whether you have a diagnosis or not, because like, we don't understand ourselves, period. Right. And you may know that you do a certain thing repeatedly, you have that pattern, but you don't know why. Right. And until someone with training and education tells you why, you're you're flying blind in trying to come up with a solution if one is needed, right? So, there's the, like coaches need coaches, but like really we need therapists. Like that's what we really need. Especially you consider like if you're in a team setting, you could be dealing with, what, 200 athletes a week, like if you're in collegiate S&C, or maybe up to 500 athletes a week if you're at the high school level. And in addition to like other coaches, administrators, parents, your partners, your kids, your parents, like all of those relationships are affected in one way or another by the way your brain is structured and how it works, and then how that drives your behavior, right? So, like, understanding that at a fundamental level, just like we understand physiology at a fundamental level, helps us prescribe training to the individual. It's the same thing with therapy.
Okay, yes, absolutely. You like just you said so much good stuff, dude. The thing I remember having this, you said like insight or realization. I'd just gotten into kind of my non-football career, and I was doing some personal training with just it generally just happened to be like kind of a geriatric population, which means they were a little bit more established in their career and kind of higher performing corporate individuals, right? There was this dude. His name was Bill. We called him Wild Bill. He was like a 78-year-old guy, real estate. His wife was like 55. He called her project manager Shirley. He was cool. He was a good dude. And if you're familiar with the Austin area, there's a city outside of Austin called Bee Cave. And Bee Cave is like Drew Brees lives there. Glenn Powell lives there, right? Like Matthew McConaughey. And this dude happened to be like a big time developer in the city of Bee Cave. And none of this really matters to what we're about to talk about, but him and I were having a conversation. And we were just talking, and somehow we got on the subject of, he was like, yeah, I went to like grief therapy because someone close to me died. And then I just kept going because I realized having a person like that was essentially like really healthy for me and ended up being really good for my career. Because in the same way that we talked about a few episodes, how like crying resets your body, he's like, when I could just take all those thoughts that I had and like dump them out of my brain, and my therapist could help me organize and sort them out and kind of tell me like what was actually going on. He's like, that really helped me. He's like, so now I just go like bi-weekly once a month, and it just helps me. He's like, it's a performance like enhancer for my career. So that was really enlightening for me. And usually people like, there used to be the stigma with it now, and now it's kind of like, if someone doesn't go to therapy, we're like, you probably should, because we all should. It's
Seriously,
kind of
like
that might be me projecting, but that's my thoughts on it. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, you know how I feel about it. Like I recommend it to everybody, even people I don't know.
And they're like,
So
that
probably
guy.
probably to the point where it's annoying. It's like,
They're
why
like,
is this?
he's
What's
recommending.
wrong with this guy?
Yeah, they're like, he's recommending me therapy, but he probably needs it too, or more.
Oh, trust me, like my therapist and I are well acquainted for the better part of a decade now. So like,
That's
yeah,
fucking
I
good.
and I'm still like trying to work those things out, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But
Yes, get into. You wrote down a little bit about the neuroscience of it. I'm gonna let you take most of that part, but I do have a little. When you're talking about dopamine, let me jump in at the very end because there's a little interesting thing.
all right, so like just like basic neuroscience, your primary neurotransmitters, at least like with regulating like behavior and emotion, are going to be like dopamine and serotonin. Not like dopamine, they're dopamine and serotonin. And dopamine, which now I would be willing to bet most people who are listening or watching this podcast are going to know that these two things are really important. And but like dopamine obviously like is primarily like your pleasure neurotransmitter. And it used to be thought of where it was like you complete a task and then you get a hit of dopamine, but now we know that like it's more like anticipatory, and where you like anticipate completing a task, and that's when you get like the dopamine hit. And then when you complete the task, that's when everything kind of settles down, but then also that's where serotonin kind of kicks in, at least like on an acute level. But like like you talked about like with your experience with anxiety, especially like with respect to sport, that's a huge driver obviously like of dopamine, is performance in general, but specifically like performance in sport, because of like how dopamine also like regulates coordination and movement. And like when you feel something that you've done like repetitively, right? Like, it could be like a pass set. It could be, throwing a baseball. It could be shooting a basketball. Like anything that you've done a bunch of times, the more coordinated and fluid it is, like first of all, like dopamine is going to help regulate that coordination. But then also like as you anticipate doing it successfully, you get those little hits of dopamine. So you think about like athletes who just love to train sports skills. That's one of the reasons they do it, because they get that. If you take 150 swings BP in the cage, right? Like, does everyone matter? No, but like that's one little hit every single time, right before you swing the bat, right before you make contact. Like, and there's an addictive component to that, because then you think about like the other kind of things that are big drivers of dopamine. You've got like drug use, you've got exercise by itself, and then you've got sexual activity, eating foods with like high levels of like satiety, right, or satiation. All of that is going to affect how your brain releases dopamine and then how much, right? But that's also like taking into account that you've got just kind of like a baseline level of dopamine, which we'll talk about when we get into some of the like disorders. But like the other big one, at least like from a cognitive standpoint, is like it's going to affect learning and memory. So like how quickly you take in information, how quickly you can like synthesize it, and then use it in reteaching it or whatever. And it also is going to like prevent cognitive decline, like as we get older, which you and I both are. Hate to break it to you, but and then it also kind of helps regulate attention and how well you can focus or not focus. And the big thing, probably the biggest reason that dopamine has become very popularized in the last, I would say, like 10 years is a psychologist from Stanford, Anna Lemke, wrote a book called Dopamine Nation. And it was basically all about like what we're doing right now. We're looking into a screen, right? We're getting all sorts of like biochemical reactions going on in our brain and our gut that affect the dopamine cycle, the serotonin cycle. But we've obviously developed like addictions to devices and the interactions that we have on them. But that's basically like a summary of what dopamine is and kind of like its functions on a very basic level, obviously.
Yeah, no, I feel like that was solid. It's funny you bring up the screen time because I was downstairs with Reese, my almost 5 month old daughter, and we were in the kitchen, and you could see the TV from our kitchen. And my wife was like, "Oh, Reese is watching TV," and I was like, "She's only 4 months old. She can't be addicted to screens yet." I was like, "I'm addicted to screens. We have to save her." I was like, "Reese, go outside, take a walk, like cut some grass." So it's funny that and it has been proven, right?
Yeah.
Pedagogy and a child like being a parent, like as screens and TV has become more prevalent over the past decades, like they've seen changes in how kids develop and what their cognitive prowess is and like all these different kinds of things. Or even when like I'm feeding her a bottle, if I'm sitting in front of the TV, like she'll be eating, but like looking,
Yeah.
even though she's four
Right.
months. I have to turn my chair so she can't see it, right? So that's crazy, dude.
Yep.
I mean, it's not, but it's definitely, yeah, something to be aware of, right? And the dopamine, when I do some work with the Coast Guard and we talk about habit change, habit cessation, and a lot of those kinds of things, right? We talk about how you mentioned a little bit with the goal setting, how it's kind of a double-edged sword because just by like setting a goal and saying you're going to do it, you get that little feeling of like, oh,
Mhm.
wow, I set a goal, and then you might not do it. It's like, well, you kind of missed the point there. So we got to balance.
Right.
To your point about like, does it feel good to take a swing? Yes. Does it feel better to actually make contact and get a hit? Yes. So we got to make sure we're actually following through with the goals that we set. But we
Right.
tell the trainers that we're working with, like dopamine is called the cuddle hormone because when you have those, like, right, you talked about it, eating, physical contact, whatever, that's what it releases. It even
Yep.
bonds you like to the person or to the thing
Right.
that gives you the feeling. And so that's why like the social media addiction, like speaking as someone who's addicted to social media and energy drinks, I can completely validate the science behind it. If n equals one, then I'm on it. You know what I mean?
I'm the one. It's me.
So yes, dude, that's cool. And then yeah, so and feel free to jump in because I feel like you have a much better grasp on the chemicals than I do. So if I miss something or you want to add, go ahead. But the other big one we're gonna kind of break down and talk about for y'all before we get into like a little bit the specifics of it is serotonin. It's the other big like chemical hormone that we have that we secrete, that we release, etc. Right? It's a mood regulating chemical. It's often referred to as a feel good neurotransmitter. Right? So it contributes to feelings of happiness, well-being, and contentment. So if our serotonin levels are optimal, it helps regulate our sleep and wake cycles, our circadian rhythm, all these different kinds of things. It also helps with our appetite, right? You mentioned this a little bit, like our fullness level, so our appetite, our digestion, really. And the two things that I just mentioned are kind of the main, along with your blood pumping and breathing, are really the main functions your body serves for you to like be a human, right? Like you have to
Right.
breathe, you have to sleep, you have to eat. And it sort of really
Yeah.
affects two out of the three. And same thing that you mentioned with dopamine, right? Learning and memory. The serotonin is involved with cognitive functions, including our learning and memory. And the more optimized, not even necessarily like, is it like your levels can be high or low, but really what doctors look for is an optimal level of serotonin for you to operate at. So it's even a little
Right.
individualized in that way, right? And actually, that kind of is a. Do you want to add anything? Because I feel like that's a good segue to
Yeah.
how
No, I
the
mean that's
imbalances can affect us. But go ahead and like jump in, say whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean like that's so you can kind of see just by like thinking through those definitions, there's a lot of overlap between the two. And honestly, like the reason that I felt it was important to talk about these two specifically is because it's more popular to be able to understand these specific neurotransmitter versus some of the other ones. Like oxytocin, for example, works very much in concert with dopamine when it comes to like physical contact and things like that, because that's, you have the dopamine that release that leads up to that physical contact, that sexual activity, whatever it is. And then you've got that oxytocin dump afterwards, which is just like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the most euphoric experience I've ever had in my life. So like there's, again, like there's obviously like a lot of interplay between both serotonin and dopamine, but also things like oxytocin. And with respect to like the levels, like you talked about, like what's optimal for you, obviously like that's going to be relatively individual. But when it comes to like diagnoses, when it's pretty clear that you have a certain pattern of behavior, like, you know, like you talked about, like every 5 to 7 days, I would feel this, you know, when you talk to a mental health professional, even when you talk to like your general practitioner, like they're going to be able to identify pretty quickly, like, hey, there's something going on. Right. And that's where the imbalance, usually in serotonin or dopamine, is most easily recognizable. You know, you don't have to have a blood test or anything like that, because again, it's like you're looking at patterns of behavior. How do you react to like a certain stimulus, like just like in training, right? You know, you talk about like counting steps between cracks in the sidewalk. That was something I did like when I was a kid, especially.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like if there were different colored tiles in like the hallway at elementary school, like I would only step on the gray tiles, right? Like I was like the neurotic little 10-year-old.
Yes. Oh my God.
Also, I had to wear my cleats to school because we're playing football at recess and during lunch. Like, so I want to win.
Yeah.
So
Got to be ready.
yeah, I mean, obviously, you can't slip on the gray tiles with your cleats.
That's so funny.
But in terms of like what the actual like, you know, disorders, what they represent. So really like the main ones are going to be depression, anxiety, and ADHD. Anything outside of those, because those are going to be the most common for one. And I would be willing to bet the majority of the population has some level of one of those three, and probably usually like it's, if you have ADHD, more than likely, like you're going to have a comorbidity of depression and anxiety, and vice versa. But not necessarily every time, but that's generally because of the way those neurotransmitters function and how they function individually and together. There's obviously going to be a higher likelihood of having a secondary diagnosis if you have one or the other as a primary. So like ADHD is a deficiency in dopamine production. So like for me, which, you know, if you've either seen any of my stuff on Twitter or heard me present or talk on podcasts, like I've been diagnosed with like combined type ADHD, which is like the worst of all worlds. But at least like that's what I used to think. And I'll kind of like, when I talk about like my own experience later on, like I'll talk about kind of the mindset shifts that go along with, you know, understanding how it works. But basically like, because, you know, my brain or the brains of other people who are diagnosed with ADHD can't produce as much dopamine as like we'll call like a neurotypical person, right? Then we're kind of like either always seeking out like those rewards, right? It could be congratulatory. It could be, you know, taking more swings in the cage. It could be seeing an A+ on the top of a test, or, you know, could it be getting like, you know, positive validation from someone you really, really want it from. But the issue is that it's a pattern of behavior, right? It's constant, because you can never account for the fact that you're not producing enough to begin with, right? So, and that's where things like medication come in, because it will help raise your level of dopamine production. It's not like supplementing the dopamine itself, it's just helping your brain produce more.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like, it's obviously a challenge, but then on the flip side, it's like it's superpower in a lot of ways, because like my brain can process information at 10 times the rate as a neurotypical person's. Doesn't mean I'm any smarter. It's just because like that's how my brain operates. That's how it functions. So it's and that's kind of like one of the things that is, as people learn about how these disorders affect how the brain works and how they behave, as well as like emotional regulation, which is a huge issue for me, then like you can kind of start taking steps, whether that's like through cognitive behavioral therapy or like CBT and a combination of that and medication, or other forms of therapy like dialectical behavioral therapy and things like that. All of it is geared towards like making you more aware of how you behave. But as far as like some of the other things, like, like you talked about anxiety. Anxiety is unique in that like it's not really characterized by a deficiency in neurotransmitters. It's more of like a hyperactivity in the levels of neurotransmitters, and like phobias fall under the category of anxiety disorders, but like most people it's going to be like a generalized anxiety. It's sometimes like this is one of those situations like where if you do have an anxiety disorder and you try to figure it out through conversations with your support system versus like a therapist, there's going to be like a minimization of it, because people who don't have a disorder, and this is kind of like an overarching point, they don't understand how it affects your ability to function constantly. Obviously not constantly to the sense of like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but on a usually like a weekly and possibly daily basis, it's going to affect your function and your ability to function. And it doesn't like fully compromise it, obviously, but the difference is that like a neurotypical person or someone who doesn't have a diagnosed disorder is like you and I have anxiety disorders. So it's always kind of there. Someone without that diagnosis can experience anxiety, but it's going to go away, right? And it's not going to be repetitive. It's not going to be recurring. It might be situationally recurring, right? But, for the most part, like it's not going to be debilitating for them. Not that it's debilitating to us because we've obviously learned to manage it, but it's much different. And that's why you do need to have that feedback from a professional. And then the other obvious one would be depression, and on the flip side, like ADHD is dopamine deficiency. Depression is a serotonin production deficiency. And it's one of those things too, just like anxiety, where someone who is neurotypical can feel depressed and they can go do, whatever the popular social media bullshit lists are. Go exercise, get out, go out at 8 a.m., sun your perineum, like whatever it is. Like that doesn't work for me, right? Like I have clinical depression, so I can't do those things. Like, do I still try to do some of those things because they're good for me? Yeah, of course I do. But it's not going to solve my problem, right? So it's also like I'd be curious to learn like what your experience was like going through that initial diagnosis process, and given both of our backgrounds, like what did it take to kind of like overcome your apprehension, I guess?
To your point about being able to the information faster, but not necessarily be more productive.
But not do anything with it.
Yes, dude. There's a commercial right now that's really popular, or I see it a lot on Sundays when I watch the NFL, and it's this commercial about AI for business. And it's these two
I've seen
executives.
it.
Have you seen? You know the one I'm talking about?
I think so, yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, well, with the use of AI, Jeremy is following up on leads 20% faster." And then the one executive's like, "Okay, so I can tell the board that Jeremy is more productive." And the guy's like, "No, but you can tell him he's processing leads 20% faster." That's what it made me think of, dude. It's like, well, he's not necessarily more productive. He just does more stuff,
Yeah, it just
right?
does more
Congratulations.
things.
You're more busy, but you're not any more productive. So,
Right.
which is like an important distinction to make in and of itself.
Yeah.
But that's so funny, dude. For me, I think the biggest, how did I get drawn? I'd been, so as I remember being young, like elementary school aged.
Mm,
And I had to go. I had to go because it was the '90s, right? So it's like if your kid had to go to therapy, like something was wrong with them.
yeah.
So I went to counseling, is what we called it, because basically, oh, dude, this is so weird. Like, it's not weird actually. Now that we're doing this, it totally makes sense. But even as like a third and fourth grader, when I would mess up or make a mistake in school or in sports, like I would punish myself.
Oh yeah.
They're like
Yeah.
either physically or like I would like I gotta take something away from myself that I
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
do, right? Like
Yep.
and for me, man, yeah, like for me, it was more like I manifested as like physical, like self punishment than anything else. But yeah, so that was even so, bro. Even in like that was like third grade, I remember that happening. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's
my
very.
parents didn't send me to therapy. They took me to church. So
I went
it
to a
worked out
church
worked
therapy.
out real rooks
Yeah,
for me.
that's so funny, dude. That's like peak millennial experience, like having These Christian parents. I have so many memes I could send you, dude, about being like a '90s Christian kid. But yeah, I think the like a big memory I do have is when like got on the medicine consistently. Dude, like my mind just felt so much like calmer, and I
Mm,
didn't have so many things running through it all the time, and I wasn't like, dude, I remember a lot in grad school and as a young strength coach, I would like stress out about how the 6 a.m. session was going to go the next day and just
yep.
worry about us, like typical, like just worry about stuff that I couldn't control or stuff that like may or may not happen.
It
And then,
definitely won't happen.
and then when I got to the 6 a.m. session, like normally it was fine, but it would like
Yeah.
interrupt my being able to go to bed.
Yeah.
Right? Like I remember that happening a lot. And then when I started consistently like getting treatment through therapy and through like taking medicine, I was like, oh bro, my mind is like so calm. I have way less
Mm,
worries. Like, and even now, or like between then and now, as I've kind of gone through, like sometimes I would take the medicine like consistently, and then sometimes I
yeah.
wouldn't. And I could always tell, and this kind of is like a little bit of, as we talk about getting people around you that can help you out, like when
Mm,
I I could recognize myself getting irrationally upset about things that just like were stupid or like didn't matter, or I'd be like, that's when I was like, oh, I need to like start taking my medicine again because I'm
mm.
getting irrationally upset about things that don't,
Yeah.
or, and most of it was like little silly personal interactions, like just stupid stuff.
Always. Always.
Yeah. So, or like my people that are around me they can kind of tell, like, either, like, so if obviously I'm never quiet. So if I'm like extremely quiet, like something is wrong. So people will be like, oh, Glenn is like not talking. So something
Mm,
must be going on. So it's like one of my biggest tells as far as like, if Glenn is silent, I'm either super nervous because I used to like when, not so much anymore, but like specifically, I remember the first time I ever started a varsity football game, like I just went through the whole school day and like didn't speak because I was
yep.
just so nervous, dude.
Yep.
And it happens occasionally, not too much. So that was like one of my main tells. So to that point of like, I just remember my mind felt like a lot clearer, and I just felt like this
Mm.
weight lifted off of me. And I was like, I called them normal people, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you term neurotypical. I was like, this is just how normal people feel. Like they just
Right. Right.
don't think about, like they just don't think about 5 years in the future. Like what's, you know what I mean? Even though I'm generally like a happy-go-lucky, like people would probably call me carefree, right? Which most things I do, I'm like pretty carefree about because I don't say this in a cheapening way, but it's like they don't matter. You know what I mean? Like I'm
Right.
just having a
Right.
good time. We should be having a good time. We can take it less seriously. We're going to be fine. So when people like, that's kind of the tells when like I'm quiet or when like I'm irrationally upset about things or I start like taking unserious things serious. That's when
Mm,
I kind of know something's going on, or people that know me are like, something's probably going on with him. So they can like
yeah.
kind of cue that in, like to your point, right? Like sometimes you can't see it happening, so they can give you that little nudge and be like, this is happening again, by the way. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's
And
the
that,
change that I remember is just this like sense of relief, like, oh my gosh, I just stopped doing stuff that doesn't matter. Or,
right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. And that's kind of like what kind of parallels like my experience, like getting diagnosed with ADHD, which was only a couple years ago, and then like starting on medication, and then eventually like also starting on an antidepressant, like that it just gave me just enough to like normalize, my function, which was it was because I had the same things like go through my head. I was like, oh, this is what normal people feel like. Amazing. Like, and I'm like, it feels so good, right? But then at the same time, you're like, but other people, this is just like their baseline.
Must be nice.
Right. So yeah, it's definitely like it's eye opening, and it's a little sobering and encouraging. I don't know, it's weird. It's kind of a lot of these things. There's there are pros and cons, right? And they're a lot of times like they're in opposition to each other. But at the same time, the things that like our respective disorders allow us to do at the level that we can do them are huge positives, right? And that was kind of like I talked about a mindset shift earlier. One of the things that my therapist and then having like a group of 3 or 4 other coaches who also had ADHD specifically, and it was affecting their coaching. They basically like reached out to me because of how I had, been pretty open about my struggles. And, for probably a year, like we just had a group message, and being able to, first of all, like understanding that I wasn't alone, but then also like having a sounding board of literally and figuratively like-minded people to share experiences, talk about problems, find solutions. That was really what allowed me to take what I initially thought was a liability, like a big liability, and how, because especially like with respect to like emotional regulation, like because ADHD it's a it's almost a personality disorder, when it comes to like the dysregulation of emotions, and being able to have other people who understood my experience and then could provide me with some balance and give me a little bit different perspective. They're like, yeah, but you realize that like this is also why your brain is like supercharged at times, and why when you can solve problems faster than most people can recognize them.
Mm.
And again, I don't say that like out of arrogance. It's just that's the way. It's both things. I feel when I feel even like the slightest bit of rejection, it crushes me. Crushes me. So like getting fired from a job, not great. Like, the loss of a relationship, something as simple as like losing a client, which happens to all, like anybody who's in the private sector, anybody who's in business, like you're going to lose clients. It's part of the job. And it sits with me for like a solid 2 weeks. But like all those things are just amplified, right?
Yeah.
And I've learned now that, first of all, those are all parts of normal life, whether it's a normal person or not. All those things happen, and I have to accept that they're going to happen to me. And also, my brain can do really unbelievable things, and that's awesome. And I have to live with both of those things, and like just my experience with mental health in general. And, from the time I started therapy, probably like I said, like 10 years ago, and learning about initially like what I thought was anxiety and depression primarily, but then I learned later was ADHD and then anxiety and depression on top of it, was that like, like you said earlier, like in the intro, all this stuff is really, really, it's either stigmatized or it's like glamorized in a lot of ways, And so a lot of like why I've been open about sharing my experience is the same, like it's why I wanted to start this podcast, right? It's one of the first conversations we had about it, is because like I want people to know the things that I didn't know, that I'm not alone, that therapy's huge, that it's okay to take meds, and it's okay for other people who don't struggle with the same things to know about it.
Mm.
Because a lot of the reason that these things are stigmatized is people don't understand them, and people are afraid of what they don't understand. So the more, people like us who understand our experiences and can communicate our experiences to people who haven't had the same experiences, the more we do that, the better off everyone is, even if only 10 people listen to this, So in terms of like all laundry list of diagnoses, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and then we'll call anxious attachment disorder, which, like in specifically like within relationships and in professional settings, I am always worried about losing something, losing a job, losing a client, losing a relationship, someone leaving me. And so instead of being able to detach from that feeling and understanding that like the emotions that I'm feeling relative to that situation or that person are not real, like they're not the truth, it makes me act in a way that is the exact opposite to what the situation requires. Right. So then everything stacked on top of that. And again, another mindset shift that I've had to take is that even with like, this is the hand that I was dealt, right? For the longest time, I've victimized myself. And I thought like, oh, I can't, because I have XYZ, I can't do this. Or, well, I acted this way and I can't change it. No, I can fucking change it. Like, here's the things that I'm going to do. And if I can't change it, I'm going to live with it. And part of being able to live with those challenges is understanding that there's two sides to that, to every one of these issues. And for every situation where I'm terrified of someone leaving me, it also makes me extremely empathetic to those who have been in that situation. I guess I'll share this story. So, because it was already on social media, but a couple of weeks ago, my doctor called in a refill for the antidepressant I am on, and my pharmacy didn't have it in stock. And this was like a Monday, about 3 weeks ago, and they didn't tell me that it wasn't in stock. They got stock in. They still didn't tell me, so I had to go in a week later to get my prescription filled. And about halfway through, about 3 to 4 days into that 7-day period, like I started what I now understand was withdrawal. And like I was extremely reactive. I would experience like the full continuum of emotion within the span of 20 minutes. And because again, like medication helps regulate
Withdrawal symptoms. Experience withdrawal.
yeah, so like I was highly reactive. I was, I would experience like the full continuum of emotion within the span of like 20 minutes. And I started like I would spiral at like the slightest like negative stimulus. And then about 3 days into that, I started having like severe suicidal ideations. And it wasn't a situation where I was like, oh, I'm really, really depressed and I'm suicidal. It wasn't like that at all. It was that I couldn't control what my brain was doing. I couldn't control my thoughts. I couldn't control my feelings. And so, and that was probably the scariest part, because it's like I didn't want to kill myself. And yet I felt like everything I looked at was an implement that I could have used to take my life, and I couldn't stop it. And that went on for like a solid 24 hours, to the point where, as I was talking to my therapist, it was like, I'm going to have to like voluntarily hospitalize myself, because I don't know what's happening and I don't want to hurt myself. And thankfully, like I had a therapy appointment that Monday afternoon, and I had started back on my medication. And as we're kind of talking through the whole experience, he asked me, he was like, well, were you taking your medication? And he doesn't prescribe it because he's a social worker, not a psychiatrist, but, he's active in helping me get what I need from a medication standpoint, making sure I'm taking the right things. And I was like, well, actually, I was off my antidepressant for a week. And he's like, holy shit, dude. He's like, you're in withdrawal right now. And I'm just like, oh my God. Not like I wasn't going to at any point like take my life, but like I acted in a way that indicated I was going to, right? And I think had I continued on and not, sought my therapist's advice as soon as I could, that could have happened. That could have been the outcome. So, you can kind of see that these chemicals in our brain and in our gut are extraordinarily powerful, right? Like crazy powerful. And, people who have never been in those kinds of situations, who don't have those experiences, there's almost no way they can understand or empathize, with us. And I think that's like what I hope people take away from this the most. It's not that if you're like a normal or a neurotypical person and you're listening to this or you're watching it, I'm not saying you don't have the ability to empathize with those of us whose brains function differently than yours. I'm saying that like you have to try really, really hard to understand our experience, even though you can't necessarily empathize with it. And sure as shit, don't sympathize. Like, don't feel sorry. I don't want you to feel sorry for me, right? And I'm sure like you don't want anybody to feel sorry for you. So the big thing is like try to understand our experience, so that if there's someone in your own life who you're close to who has a similar or exhibits similar behaviors, you don't approach it from an uneducated and perspective with lacking empathy. So, and I have a note apparently
Yeah,
that
man, that was good. Thank you.
that it said basically my life is just one long MGK song, as we were sharing songs back and forth yesterday.
If public service announcement, everyone, if you love MGK more than a normal amount, go see your primary care physician, because it's a warning sign. It's basically what we're saying.
Red flag.
Is basically what we're saying. No, dude, thank you for sharing that. Obviously, that was like a courageous thing for you to do. So thank you. I appreciate that. People will benefit from that undoubtedly. So thank you for doing that. And while you were talking, I had a lot of thoughts, but the one that came to my mind the most, right? Are you familiar with the quote, "That which nourishes me destroys me"?
No, but like that's exactly That's exactly what this is.
Yeah. So it comes from Latin, right? And there's this. So it originated from a playwright, and his name was Christopher Marlowe. And essentially,
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Marlowe was during the Elizabethan times, and he's the playwright that inspired William Shakespeare to like do what he did. And then
Yeah.
essentially, Christian Marlowe died at like 29 years old, really young. But that was kind of like so the last remaining painting of this famous playwright. It literally has that written in the top corner because that was kind of the message that he left. Like when he left the earth, like that was the thing that he had written beside him in his journal in Latin, right? And it's so kind of is like quite literal. Like there's a bunch of literal and philosophical, right? Like becoming too dependent on a person's substance or activity can weaken you, but it also
Yeah.
has a tone of personal growth, right? Yeah. But
Yeah.
it also has a tone of personal growth to it because past failures can be seen as nourishment that leads to personal growth, right? But the
Yep.
pain of the experience is like it's that pruning. You have to grow from it. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean.
Yeah. Or
I'm in it.
yes, or the in an unhealthy way, like the pursuit of fame, wealth, or can lead to
Mm.
great achievements, but can also cause personal ruin.
Oof.
And it's this idea of how do people listening to this, because you're probably a high performer, like, man, how do you balance those things and that double-edged sword and having, because
Yeah.
if you're going to be, I talk about this when I speak to groups of people. I'm like, look, dude, if you're going to be excellent at something, then everything else takes a backseat to it. And it's going to
Yes.
cost you
Yes.
it's going to cost you a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And you have to, and that's something that I struggle with now, right? Because I was hell bent on being a D1 head football strength coach, and I was willing to give up everything.
Right.
But now I'm not because I value other things. Man, how do I
Mm.
find this? How do I sit in this balance of like, I want to be amazing, but I can't because I'm not willing to sacrifice everything that I use, and I'm not able to, right? Because
Mm.
I'm not a young single guy. But at the same time, like having a family and a wife and now a kid is like giving me a different dimension of motivation, right? And like feeling about things. So when you were talking, I think about that quote a lot because I think about that quote in relationship to my relationship with football because it drove every decision I ever made.
Yep.
And some of it was good and some was bad. And in anything, for my pursuit, it was football, right? But it could be anything. But it's like the game of football will take things from you forever until you stop giving it things. But
Oof.
there are things you can take from the game of football, right? And for me, it was like relationships, experiences. It's opened doors for me now as an adult. And you have to figure out like when are you going to draw the line of when you're done having things taken from you versus when you can like when you've benefited enough, right? It's the phrase take full advantage of the opportunity your organization offers you because your organization will take full advantage of you and you got to
Mm.
figure out like where the sweet spot is kind of what that is. So when you were talking, a lot of it made me think about like, man, that which nourishes me destroys me. And it's you got to, and all of us have to live in that middle space. But with that being said, you said a lot of good stuff. So to kind of bring it to a close, my I had like a whatever, dude. Compared to your experience, it's very minimal. But also, it's not about comparing
There's no.
whose was worse
There's
or whose was better, right? But
all. It's all just
I had
different.
this. I was living in West Virginia. Yeah. So for me, like I always remember going to the doctor and you fill out the little depression, like you have to fill out the depression handout. And
Yep.
I was like, dude, this is so stupid. And then the one time, dude, right? Like I was living in West Virginia, like the living situation was terrible. I hated my job. We were crappy. I didn't want to be there. I didn't have any friends or family. And I filled out the thing and I was like, oh, this is what I do. Cause I definitely like
Mm.
I could tell I was like not feeling myself. I was sad. I just wanted to sleep a lot. And I was like, oh, I have acute depression. And then I
Mm-hmm.
filled out the little sheet and I was like, sure enough. And so for me in that space, like quite literally, it was like I needed to physically leave the situation that I was in. And I talk about this when I speak. I talk about how success is situational and it's personal and professional. And quite literally, the physical location I was in, I was going to have neither of either. And I needed to
Mm.
get out of there. So I did. Luckily, we all got fired. So it made it, I was like, thank God, dude. Silver linings.
Uh,
So once I physically left the situation space and I got to be around people that I like cared about and felt at home, I was way
mm.
better. But anyways,
Yeah.
that was like so I have that really distinct memory too. But to leave people with something actionable if they haven't gleaned anything already, I think we talked about what having a support staff, quote unquote, around you could look like. And so I think for us, and from us talking, what I've gleaned is, right, it's like your primary care physician, because they essentially serve as like the quarterback or the point guard of the healthcare system. And then they can
Right.
refer you to some kind of therapist, social worker, someone that can help you in that space, right? And
Right.
they also, like you mentioned, like having someone that has the medical legal power to prescribe you medicine that will be helpful. Right. So there's those two things. And then the third one that I noticed us talking about was someone in your life, friend, family member, someone that's you spend a lot of time with that like you've given permission or power to like speak truth to you. And also they know you
Mm-hmm.
well enough that you
Right.
know you can trust their input and their advice. Like when they
Yeah.
come to you and they're like, "Hey man, pretty sure something's off." And you can gift them that power and that authority and that
Mm.
responsibility, right? Like you should frame it as a ask because it is a
Yeah.
responsibility for me to be like, "Hey Tim, here's what's going on. If you see me acting weird, I'd love for you to say something." Like if you accept it, cool. And if you don't, that's
Right.
totally fine.
Yeah.
So
And
like be
I
cognizant
think,
of that
yeah.
you.
And to that point too, like don't ask your closest friend or your spouse or partner to have that role. Like that's not what
Mm,
they're there for. Like they're part of your support system, but they're too close to you to be able to like objectively give you feedback. There's always going to be something
mm,
emotional tied to whatever they're telling you. So like you're not going to get in and
yeah,
it's not their fault. Like it's just the way like those kinds of relationships are. But it's got to be somebody who's
yeah.
close to you, but not like it's almost like second level. So and the other thing actually that I was thinking about when as you were saying that what I found to be really effective that is just like some sort of practice of like what I call anchor activities. Like a friend of mine kind of turned me on to that term. So it's just hobbies, but like hobbies is kind of like yeah, it's kind of cliche, but like anchor activities has meaning, right? Because it's something that you can anchor to regularly, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, something you enjoy, something that brings you to the present and something that takes you out of even it doesn't even have to be necessarily like a negative headspace, but just like gets you out of whatever the situation is you're in. And for me, it's mountain biking always has been. I didn't realize it at the, for most of my life, but like now it is like that's my anchor activity. So, I try to go once a week. And I even like I'll block out my half day on my calendar once a week and to make sure that like I get to ride my bike because when I don't get to ride my bike, I'm kind of a shitty person. So,
Oh, dude. Yeah, that's finding your sanctuary. We talked about that earlier
yep.
a couple episodes ago.
Yep. So,
Also, if people don't know what perineal sunning is, just Google it, but not on your work computer.
NSFW.
Per earlier, because that just made me laugh, dude. That was so funny that you said that. Okay, cool. I like that. So, primary care, mental health care professional, someone with prescriptive powers. I like that.
Ooh,
When we were talking about like I'm going to use the word when we were talking about it, I almost thought of in like the recovery world how you have like your spouse also can't be your sponsor.
your sponsor,
You know
right?
what I
Yeah.
mean?
Exactly.
Uh, yeah, so that's what it made me think of because it's like accountability and they care about you, but it's a
Yep.
different, like, it's a little bit different. So we'll call it like, who's your mental health sponsor or your,
Yeah,
right? Or like
that's
yeah,
huge.
let's just call it that. It's probably not the best term, but it makes sense.
No, actually I think it is. Like
Um,
I think it's perfect.
Okay, good. And then, so yes, primary care, mental health professional, mental health sponsor, and then you, like, what are your grounding activities? And do you have self awareness to figure out I can tell when I am irrationally upset, something's going
Mm-hmm.
on, right? So
Yep.
you also play a role and then you get to activate that support system around you. So
Yep.
hopefully that's kind of what you could take from this whole wide ranging conversation is like, A, let us serve an example where it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to put it in public because people will not think less of you. They will probably
Yep.
relate to you more and they'll appreciate your authenticity and your
Yep.
vulnerability and your strength. Finding those four keys, right? Like Your primary care, your mental health, who's your sponsor, and then what are you doing for you as far as anchoring, finding your sanctuary, and being self-aware. So
Yeah.
I guess if we had to summarize like that would be what we would recommend, or a great place to start for like a mental health support system. And then
Yep.
it's a journey. You're going to be on and off, up and down, back and forth. Like it'll be kind of like in the world of physical fitness, like you're always training and your training is always evolving. And sometimes you're hurt and you do things differently. And sometimes things are going really well. It's the same thing. You're just on this journey for a super long
Yep.
time and like find people to walk it with you and it'll be way better than it could be.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and advocate for yourself with those people. You can't, especially like people in your support system who don't have the same experiences. You have to tell them how to support you because they're not going to know how.
That's a good point. Yeah. And that's helpful for them. They will appreciate
Yeah.
that. It will not come
Yeah,
off
for
as
sure.
you acting
Yeah,
a
and
certain
and if
way.
they're
You
reactive
know?
towards that, if they're defensive, you don't want them in your circle. Like they can be maybe third, fourth tier, but
Yeah.
like you don't want them in that first tier. So,
Yeah, for sure. Dang. I like that. Okay, dude, good episode. I feel
very
like we
good.
did something good. Put some
Very
good
good.
out there.
So the ten of you who
Yes,
listen to or watch this will get something out of it.
do.
We do. We have like 30 subscribers. That being said, if you do listen to this, share it with somebody, post it on social media, like give us a like on Spotify, subscribe, like, do all those things because that's why we're doing this, is to try to help as many people as possible, even if it's only 100 people. It's still way more than we're going to be able to help individually in our daily lives, and even through social media, like, because this is going to be, if the depth that we're able to get into here is much greater than in a newsletter or a Twitter post or an Instagram reel. Like, it's just, which is the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought of this, dude, but it's long form conversations for long term change is what it
Ooh,
is.
100%.
That's a bar,
It's a
dude.
fire
That's a
it's a
bar.
fire quote. Yeah.
I love it. Well, episode 4, Gray Matters podcast. Tim and I exchanged a text message earlier, and it said ADHD on fleek. And I think that's just what we brought to you guys just now. So
God.
we will be back next time. Hit us up on the social medias at Glenn Revel, at Tim Kettering, all the things. You know where to find us. We appreciate you guys. We'll talk to you soon.
This episode of the Gray Matters podcast is brought to you in part by Revelation Facilitation, building teams based on values and purpose. Visit us online at revelationfacilitation.com.
It's also brought to you by Maverick Human Performance, where we empower coaches to build adaptable systems to navigate the complexities of athletic development. Find out more at maverickhumanperformance.com.